20 minutes before noon on a Tuesday in March, the atrium of Meridian Medical Center on Peachtree Street, Atlanta. Lenora Vance stepped out of the hospital director's elevator with 4 members of the Georgia Healthcare Oversight Committee and a journalist from Atlanta Journal-Constitution named Priya Sutton, who had her recorder already running. She saw the man near the information desk. Worn canvas jacket, a backpack with a broken zipper held shut with a binder clip, a paper coffee cup from the gas station across the street. He was asking the receptionist something. Lenora glanced at the jacket and the coffee cup and spoke without breaking stride. "The waiting area is for patients and registered visitors." She gestured toward the row of plastic chairs along the east wall. "Sir, someone will help you over there." The man looked at her. He nodded once and moved the way she had pointed. Priya Sutton lowered her recorder 1 beat behind. 2 hours earlier, on the other side of the city, the kitchen of a craftsman house in Decatur smelled like burnt toast and orange juice. Rowan Phelps stood at the counter in a gray Henley with the canvas jacket hung over the back of a chair. He was scraping the toast over the sink. His daughter Hazel sat at the kitchen table in her school uniform with her science notebook open and her knees drawn up to her chest, reading something slowly with her lips moving. She was 9 years old and she read the way her mother used to run, chin down, completely inside it, no awareness of the room around her. "Dad," she said without looking up, "what does the immune system actually do when you get a shot?" Rowan turned from the sink. "You want the long answer or the one that fits on your quiz? The real one." "Okay." He dried his hands and came to stand beside her. He drew a small diagram on the corner of her notebook page with a ballpoint pen. An intruder, a flag, an army that remembered the flag afterward. Hazel watched the pen move. "So it's like practice," she said. "Exactly like practice." She nodded and copied the diagram carefully into the margin. He set a bowl of cereal beside her notebook and went back to the counter. On the wall above the table hung a framed photograph. Rowan, younger, in a white coat, a woman beside him with the same high cheekbones Hazel had, a 2-year-old Hazel on the woman's hip, everyone squinting happily into afternoon sun. Behind them rose the glass facade of a building under scaffolding. Meridian Medical Center, May 2017. Day they had broken ground on the pediatric wing. Dana Phelps had been the one who told him to take the fellowship in the first place. "You're going to be the best pediatric cardiologist in this state," she had said, "and I need you to stop being modest about it." She had been 34 years old and completely right about everything until the accident on I-285 in January of 2021. 2 years, 3 months. Rowan had learned to count mornings like a man counting stairs in the dark. Every breakfast was a small arithmetic. Every question Hazel asked him was one Dana would have answered with more patience and better handwriting. At 7:40, he drove Hazel to Westover Elementary in his old blue Subaru. The dogwoods along Commerce Drive were just starting to open, pale pink against the gray March sky. Hazel talked the whole way about her class visiting a hospital the following week for a science unit. "We're going to the big one downtown, the one with the glass bridge between the buildings." Rowan kept his eyes on the traffic. "That'll be interesting. You know that hospital, Dad." A small pause. "I've read about it." He pulled up at the school gate, zipped her jacket to the collar, and reminded her to eat the apple in her bag, not just the crackers. She hugged him hard enough to knock the air out of him and ran inside. At 8:20, he stopped at the gas station on North Druid Hills Road for coffee because the machine at the clinic had been broken for 3 days. The clinic was a narrow storefront on a strip between a laundromat and a tax preparation office. Phelps Community Pediatric Practice, 8 exam rooms, 2 nurse, 1 front desk coordinator named Beverly who had worked with him since the beginning and made birthday cards for every patient who turned a year old. She was at the front desk when he walked in, sorting mail with a look that meant something had already happened. "Dr. Phelps." Meridian called. "Dr. Kessler's office." Something about a case review at 11, the alderman boy. She slid a message slip across the counter. "They said they want the original imaging notes, not the copies. In person." Something about the oversight committee being in today. Rowan read the slip. The alderman case was his, had been his since the boy was 3 days old and transferred from Grady with a hole in his heart the size of a dime. Marcus Alderman was 7 now and ran track at his elementary school. Rowan took his jacket from the hook by the door, picked up his coffee, and put the message slip in his pocket. Beverly started to say something else. He shook his head gently. "I'll handle it. Hold my 9:30, 15 minutes if I'm not back." He drove across the city with his hands easy on the wheel and the radio off. At the same hour, 20 floors above Peachtree Street, Lenora Vance stood at the long mirror behind her office door and adjusted the collar of her blazer for the second time. Black wool, hair in a low chignon, the pearl earrings she wore, on days she expected scrutiny. She had been chief medical officer of Meridian Medical Center for 7 months. She had earned the position after 4 years as deputy director in Cleveland, a successful accreditation review, and a published paper on resource allocation that 3 people on the Meridian board had cited by name during her final interview. She was 39 years old, and she had never once let anyone see her hesitate. Her assistant knocked once. "Ms. Vance, Dr. Hartwell is here from the committee," and Kessler called up, "says the imaging notes from the Aldman review may be coming over by courier." She turned from the mirror. "By courier? He may be bringing them himself." "The original consulting physician on the case. Who is that?" A pause. "A Dr. Phelps. He runs a clinic in Decatur." She nodded and did not ask more. She had no reason to. Philip Kessler was in her doorway now. 61, silver-haired, the kind of careful smile that meant he had already decided something. 3 things before the committee arrives. Dr. Hartwell's group moved their arrival up to 11 sharp. The AJC journalist confirmed she's sitting in. "And we'll have a visiting physician this morning with original case documentation. I told him to come up directly to the conference suite on 12. Lenora frowned slightly. "Directly? Why not through the administrative intake desk?" "It's urgent review material. I thought you'd want it in front of the committee on time." She let it go. She lifted her blazer from the chair and thought, without meaning to, about her first week in this building. Kessler had walked her through the atrium and said, over coffee, that the committee's confidence in her was conditional on the impression she made in the first year. "They watch how you control the room," he had said. "The atrium is the first room. What they see there they assume about everything behind it." She had filed that away and held it. At 10:45 she rode the executive elevator to the ground floor. The committee's cars were pulling into the circular drive. She walked through the sliding doors into the cool March air and moved forward to greet them. 14 floors above her, a man stood at a window in the private medical library with a cup of coffee he had not touched. Dr. Solomon Greer, 71 years old, founding director of the Meridian Pediatric Cardiac Program, and the reason the glass bridge between buildings existed, had come in that morning without telling his assistant why. He watched the committee step out of their cars below. He watched Lenora walk forward. Then his eye moved to the sidewalk across the drive. A blue Subaru pulling to the curb. A man stepping out in a canvas jacket, a backpack over one shoulder, a paper coffee cup in his hand. Solomon Greer put his own cup down very carefully on the window ledge and did not look away. 11 minutes past 11, the waiting area is for patients and registered visitors. Rowan nodded once and moved the way she had pointed. He did not look at her. He did not look at the committee. He walked across the atrium with his backpack over one shoulder, his coffee in his hand, and his face did not change. He found a plastic chair along the east wall between an elderly man reading a magazine and a woman with a sleeping toddler on her lap. He sat down. He put his backpack between his feet. He waited. He did not take out his phone. At the information desk, the receptionist who had been speaking with him when the CMO walked through looked at the man in the plastic chair, looked at the executive elevator bay, and pressed her lips together. Her name was Dottie Briggs. She had worked the information desk at Meridian for 19 years. She had been the one who handed Rowan Phelps his visitor badge on the day he'd presented the Alderman case results at Grand Rounds in 2019, and the whole room had stood up. She watched him sit in the plastic chair with his broken zipper backpack and his gas station coffee, and she picked up the desk phone. She called up to the 12th floor. She said carefully that a physician with case documentation for the committee review was waiting in the atrium because of a misunderstanding about visitor access. The person on the other end said they'd send someone down. Nobody came down for 11 minutes. At 11:22, Rowan stood up, adjusted his backpack strap, and walked to the administrative intake desk himself, where a man in scrubs looked at his jacket and told him the intake desk was for credentialed staff. Rowan set his coffee down on the counter. He took his hospital credentials card from his wallet, the consulting physician ID from the Meridian Pediatric Cardiac Program, renewed every 2 years since 2016, and laid it on the counter beside the coffee. The man in scrubs looked at it. He looked up. He said nothing for a moment. I have a case review on 12, Rowan said. I was asked to bring original documentation. He was sent to the service corridor and the back elevator with a laminated visitor sticker printed Escort Quiled in red letters. In the back elevator, a porter with a linen cart looked at the visitor sticker and then at the canvas jacket and said quietly, "They doing some kind of inspection today?" "Committee review," Rowan said. The porter nodded. "You a doctor, pediatric cardiologist?" The porter looked at him for a moment. "My nephew had heart surgery here when he was a baby. That right?" "Somebody from a clinic in Decatur. Tiny place. My sister still talks about that man." He shook his head. "Some kind of miracle worker." Rowan looked at the floor indicator. 11, 12. "I hope your nephew's doing well. Plays soccer now." The porter smiled. "Can you believe that?" The elevator opened on 12. Rowan walked out alone. He handed the documentation to a young woman in a Meridian lanyard who took the folder without looking at him and told him he could wait in the hall. He stood in the hall outside the conference suite for 6 minutes with his backpack at his feet and his empty coffee cup in his hand, until a maintenance worker pointed him toward a recycling bin at the end of the corridor. He threw the cup away. He started back toward the service elevator at 11:40. 3 floors below, Lenora Vance was walking the committee through the cardiac wing corridor when the executive elevator opened behind them. She heard the footsteps before she turned. Solomon Greer walked out of the elevator with the unhurried precision of a man who had designed the corridor they were standing in. He was in a tweed jacket with a visitor lanyard that said Founder in small gold letters. The committee stopped as one. Dr. Hartwell extended his hand immediately. The journalist raised her recorder. Solomon shook hands with 2 of the committee members, said something that made Hartwell laugh, and then turned and walked toward the service corridor with purpose. The committee watched him go. Lenora followed. He met Rowan in the corridor outside the maintenance bay. Rowan had his backpack over one shoulder and was looking at a framed architectural diagram on the wall, the original floor plan for the pediatric wing dated 2016, mounted behind glass. Solomon stopped in front of him. "Rowan." He put his hand out. "I owe you an apology for the way this morning went." Rowan shook his hand. He did not smile. He looked at the older man steadily. Solomon turned. He put his hand on Rowan's shoulder and walked him back toward the committee, his voice pitched to carry without effort. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Dr. Rowan Phelps, consulting cardiologist on our pediatric cardiac program since 2016, lead physician on the Alderman case which you have in front of you this morning, a case that resulted in a full arterial repair on a newborn with less than a 40% survival prognosis. The boy is 7 years old and runs the 400 at his school." He let that sit for one moment. "The documentation you're reviewing today exists because of Dr. Phelps. The outcome you're citing as a program benchmark is Dr. Phelps." Dr. Hartwell stepped forward first. He shook Rowan's hand with both of his. The 2 associates followed. The journalist stopped her recorder, looked at it, and started it again. Priya Sutton took 4 photographs in quick succession. Lenora stood where she was. She could feel the floor through the soles of her shoes. At the far end of the corridor, Philip Kessler had stopped walking. He stood very still for one moment, then turned and walked in the direction of the stairs. Solomon Greer was already directing the committee toward the case review room. He extended an invitation to Rowan with a small nod. Rowan accepted politely. "I have to pick up my daughter at 3. We'll be done well before then." Rowan looked at him. He nodded once and went in. Lenora turned professionally and followed the committee. In the elevator going up to the review room, Dr. Hartwell stood beside her and said, without looking at her, "I'd like to schedule some time with you later this week, Ms. Vance." His voice was pleasant. His eyes were not unkind. "Just the 2 of us." "Of course," she said. She got the committee through the review. She sat at the head of the table and moved the agenda forward with the precision she had rehearsed. Solomon said nothing about the corridor. He asked Hartwell measured questions about accreditation standards and did not look at her once. At 1:15, she returned to her office and closed the door. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she sat down at her computer and typed the name Rowan Phelps into the hospital system. 17 results. Phelps, community pediatric practice, founding physician, consulting cardiologist, Meridian Pediatric Cardiac Program, 2016, to present. Co-author 3 peer-reviewed papers on congenital heart repair outcomes in under-resourced patient populations. A photograph from a grant presentation. A younger man in a white coat at a table of administrators. a woman beside him in a green blazer laughing at something outside the frame. The patient population note at the bottom of his consulting profile read, "Primarily serves uninsured and underinsured pediatric patients in the greater Decatur area. Clinic operating on sliding scale model since founding." She read it twice. She sat very still. At 2:30, she drove herself across the city to Decatur. She found Phelps Community Pediatric Practice on the strip between the laundromat and the tax office. A paper sign on the door said back at T3:30. She stood on the sidewalk in her black blazer in the March wind and felt foolish and small and like someone who had swallowed a swallowed stone at 11 o'clock in the morning and was only now starting to feel it. She took a business card from her coat pocket, crossed out her title with one clean line, and wrote on the back in her own handwriting, "Dr. Phelps, I owe you an apology that deserves more than an email. I hope you'll allow me to offer it properly." She tucked it under the door. That evening at 6:30, Philip Kessler was on the phone in his car in the Meridian parking structure. She walked a private practice doctor through the atrium in a canvas jacket with half the committee watching, he was saying, though that was not what had happened and he knew it. Greer showed up and made the whole program review about his pet project. "The optics for the accreditation cycle, Lloyd. I'm just flagging it. I'm not asking you to act." He listened. He smiled at the steering wheel. "Of course. Just wanted you in the picture." At the same hour, Rowan opened the door of the craftsman's house and let Hazel run past him into the kitchen. He hung his jacket on the hook and picked up the mail from the front step and set it on the counter without looking at it. "Dad," she was already at the refrigerator. "Did you go to the big hospital today? The one with the glass bridge?" He kept his face neutral. "For a little while." "What's it like inside?" He thought about the atrium, the plastic chairs, the porter's nephew playing soccer, Solomon Greer's hand on his shoulder, the floor plan behind the glass on the 12th floor, his own handwriting in the margin of the original schematic, a note he'd written at 29 that he'd forgotten he'd made. "It's a good building," he said. "I think you'll like it when you go." Saturday morning came in bright and cold. Lenora had not planned to leave her apartment. She had slept badly for 2 nights, lying awake looking at the ceiling, replaying the corridor, the plastic chairs, the look on Hartwell's face. At 9, she pulled on jeans for the first time in weeks and walked 4 blocks to Little Shop Books on Commerce Drive for a novel she had been putting off since December. The bell over the door rang. The shops smelled of paper and radiator heat and somebody's coffee going cold on the front counter. She heard the laugh before she turned the corner into the children's section, high and bright, and then underneath it a quieter one, a father's laugh, the kind that came from genuine surprise rather than performance. She stopped at the end of the picture book aisle. Rowan was sitting on the floor in jeans and a navy pullover with the sleeves pushed up, his back against the shelves. Hazel was beside him with a book across both their laps, pointing at something on the page and explaining it to him with complete authority. He was listening the way some people listen, not waiting to respond, actually listening, his whole face present. Hazel looked up first. She looked at Lenora with frank curiosity and no recognition at all. She closed the book carefully and stood and came over. She held out the book. "Have you read this one? It's about a girl who figures out what's wrong with a hospital and fixes it and then grows up to run the whole thing." Lenora crouched down to her level. "I haven't read that one. You should. My dad reads medical stuff, but I make him read this one too sometimes." She glanced back at her father. "Dad, this lady might like the hospital book." Rowan had gotten to his feet. He stood at the end of the aisle with one hand in his pocket and the other still holding the book they'd been reading. He looked at her with a face that was neither cold nor warm. "Good morning, good morning." Hazel looked between them with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. "Do you know my dad? We met this week," Lenora said carefully. "At his work." Hazel considered this. "He doesn't really work at a hospital. He has a clinic. It's small." She said it the way a person states a fact they are entirely proud of. "But Beverly lets me eat crackers at the front desk when I visit." Rowan's mouth shifted very slightly at one corner. Lenora paid for the book Hazel had recommended. At the register she noticed, on the inside front cover, a small letter H drawn carefully in pencil in the bottom right corner. The woman at the register saw her notice it and smiled without saying anything and slid the book into a paper bag. Outside, she sat down on the bench in front of the shop and held the book on her knees and did not open it for a long time. Commerce Drive moved past her in its Saturday way. A man walked a big, shaggy dog. Two women pushed strollers side by side, talking without pausing for breath. None of them looked at her. On Wednesday morning, Solomon Greer called Rowan from a car headed to the airport and offered him a formal consulting expansion. 4 mornings a week in the Meridian Pediatric Cardiac Program, a small office on the 9th floor, co-administration with the CMO's office on program metrics and patient intake standards. Rowan was quiet long enough that Solomon checked his phone to see if the call had dropped. It would be part-time, Rowan said finally. Beverly handles scheduling. I can't restructure the clinic calendar without her input, whatever terms you need, and I pick Hazel up at 3, every day, written into the arrangement. I'll think about it and call you Thursday. He called Thursday morning and said yes. He started the following Tuesday. For the first week, he and Lenora worked in the same corridor and spoke only about the program. She brought him intake data. He read it the way she'd noticed he read everything. Like it was a conversation rather than a document, like the numbers were telling him something the words hadn't gotten to yet. He could look at a referral pattern and tell her in one sentence why families from 2 particular zip codes weren't reaching the clinic in time for early intervention. She started taking notes when he spoke. She didn't tell him that. On Thursday evening, they worked late on a grant proposal deadline. At 8:45, she ordered Thai food delivered to the small 9th floor conference room and set 2 containers on the table between their laptops. The floor had emptied 2 hours ago. Only a cleaning crew worked at the far end of the building. A floor polisher hummed somewhere on the other side of the wall. She asked him quietly about Dana. He put down his fork. He took a moment before he answered, not because he was deciding whether to pup, but because he was deciding where to start. She was healthy. That's the thing people don't. It wasn't an illness. It was a Tuesday morning and a patch of ice on the overpass and a truck that stopped too fast. He was quiet. I was in surgery when they called. I finished the surgery. I didn't know yet how to be the kind of person who doesn't finish the surgery. He looked at the table. I've had a long time to think about whether that was the right call. Was it? I don't know. The boy lived. Dana was already gone by the time I got to the hospital. He picked up his fork again, set it down again. Hazel was 4. I think she remembers more than she lets on. Lenora was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. It's a grief with a shape now. It doesn't ambush me the way it used to. She looked at her food. She told him, after a long silence, about her father. A Pullman porter turned school custodian in Macon. A parent who had come to her middle school open house and been redirected by a teacher's aide to the maintenance entrance because of his uniform. He had gone in that way, without saying a word, and found her science fair project and stood in front of it for 10 minutes straight and cried quietly, in the way people cry when they are so proud they don't know what else to do with it. I was 12, she said. I watched him go in that door and I watched his face and I swore out loud on the walk home. I said out loud, I will never be the person who points. She looked at her hands, and on Tuesday I pointed. Rowan looked at her across the table. He was quiet for a moment. Sometimes the thing we're most afraid of becoming is exactly where we look when we're under pressure. She did not answer. She picked up her chopsticks and looked at the table. Down the hall, Philip Kessler passed the conference room door, paused, looked through the narrow vertical window at the 2 of them, and took out his phone. He held it up to the glass. The screen dimmed before he got the angle. He lowered it and walked on. Dottie Briggs, coming from the supply alcove across the corridor with a stack of patient information folders, saw him at the window. She saw him lift the phone. She stopped walking. She had worked the information desk at Meridian for 19 years. She had 8 months left before she was eligible for her full pension. She stood in the corridor for a long moment, holding the folders against her chest. Then she walked back to the alcove, set them down, and took out her own phone, and began to write down times and dates in the Notes app, carefully, the way she had always done everything at that desk, as if the record mattered, as if someone would eventually need it. The board review was scheduled for the following Wednesday at 9, in the executive conference suite on the 14th floor. Philip Kessler had submitted a formal conduct concern to the board governance committee, citing 2 photographs taken through conference room glass, time-stamped, captioned, as demonstrating unprofessional proximity between the CMO and a contracted consultant, and a 6-paragraph memorandum arguing that Lenora Vance had publicly embarrassed the program's founding director before a state oversight committee and subsequently entered a personal entanglement with the same physician that compromised her neutrality as an institutional leader. Lenora read the memorandum at 5:45 in the morning at her kitchen counter. She read it once, set it down, and looked out the window at the parking lot below. Then she washed her cup and got dressed in the charcoal suit she wore when she expected the floor to shift. Rowan received an email from Solomon's office at 7:30 summoning him to the same room at the same hour with no stated reason. He drove across the city in the gray morning with the radio off, his hands relaxed on the wheel. They met in the hallway outside the conference suite at 8:55. Lenora looked at him for 1 second and looked away. Rowan held the door. Inside, the long table was already full. Lloyd Calder from the governance committee sat at one end with his hands folded and his face arranged in the expression of a man who has not yet decided which way to fall. Philip Kessler sat near the far end in a dark suit with the smallest careful smile. The chair read the conduct summary aloud in a flat voice. Public disregard of a credentialed physician before state oversight. Conduct inconsistent with institutional leadership standards. Suggestion of a personal relationship creating a conflict of interest in program administration. Lenora raised her hand for permission to speak. She accepted full responsibility for her conduct in the atrium. She rejected the second charge on the record, clearly without apology. There was a knock at the door. Dottie Briggs opened it without waiting. She walked in wearing her blue information desk jacket with a manila folder held against her side. She did not look at Kessler. She did not hurry. "I apologize for interrupting. There are records the board should have before the testimony continues." She laid the folder on the table. On Tuesday, the 11th of March at 10:51 in the morning, Dr. Phelps arrived at this institution with original case documentation requested by the committee. He was directed to the atrium seating area by the CMO, which I witnessed from the information desk. He waited 11 minutes. He was then redirected to the administrative intake desk, where a staff member sent him to the service corridor on the basis of his appearance. She paused. On Tuesday the 18th, at 8:46 in the evening, Mr. Kessler photographed Dr. Phelps and Ms. Vance through the 9th floor conference room window. I witnessed this from the supply alcove across the corridor. She reached into the folder. On Thursday the 20th, Mr. Kessler forwarded a photograph to a journalist named Caleb Norris at the AJC with a subject line reading "Developing Situation." The forward is here. On Sunday the 23rd, 4 calls to Mr. Calder's personal cell, totaling 41 minutes. She straightened. "I have kept this record because my pension eligibility depends on my employment continuing through October, and Mr. Kessler is the officer who administers staff contracts. I have worked at this institution for 19 years. I am not going to watch it used to discard another good physician." Philip Kessler stood. "This is a front desk employee offering." The door at the back of the room opened. Solomon Greer walked in. He moved to the head of the table and stood there without sitting and looked down the length of the room at Kessler, and Kessler sat. Solomon turned to the board. "I have had an outside firm conducting a quiet communications review of this office for 11 months. What Ms. Briggs has documented is consistent with what that review found, and more." He set a hand on the back of the chair. "Mr. Kessler's employment is terminated effective this morning, pending referral to the medical board for review of prior conduct, including a separate matter I will not detail here that this committee will receive in writing by end of day." He turned to Lenora. His voice did not soften. "Miss Vance, I hired you because I believed you were the kind of person who knew what it felt like to be underestimated and who would never mistake a jacket for a judgment. On Tuesday, you mistook a jacket for a judgment." He held her gaze. "I trust the last 2 weeks have been instructive." Lenora held his gaze. Her voice was level. "They have been good." He looked at Rowan. One corner of his mouth moved. "My apologies again, Rowan. I seem to keep owing you those. It keeps coming out even," Rowan said. Kessler was walked out by hospital security through the main atrium at 9:43 in the morning, past the information desk where Dottie Briggs was logging the first visitors of the day. She did not watch him cross the atrium. She was looking at the clipboard. That evening, Lenora left the building at 7:15. She walked through the main atrium for the first time since Tuesday without hurrying. She looked at the light coming through the tall glass panels. She looked at the way the atrium opened up in the late afternoon. The ceiling height, the warmth of the amber lights, The way the space seemed designed to make people feel less frightened than they had been when they came in. Which it had been. She had read the architect's notes in the program archive 3 days ago, and that was exactly what they said. Dottie was still at the information desk. Lenora stopped in front of it. She hadn't planned anything. "Thank you, Dottie." Dottie looked up. She did not smile exactly. She inclined her head the way she had inclined it 19 years ago to a young cardiologist who'd stopped to learn her name on his first day consulting, and then she went back to her log. Rowan was on the sidewalks outside, standing at the curb, looking up Peachtree Street at nothing in particular, with his hands in his jacket pockets. "Can I give you a ride?" He looked at her. He nodded. She drove him across the city in the blue March evening, with the windows cracked. The air was cold and smelled like rain coming. The lights of Midtown spread out behind them and then contracted in the rearview mirror into something small and bright. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The dashboard glowed softly. The radio stayed off. "Hazel asked me something last night," Rowan said. "What did she ask?" "She asked if the lady from the bookstore was nice." Lenora kept her eyes on the road. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I was still finding out. I don't give my daughter conclusions I haven't reached yet." Lenora nodded slowly. The city gave way to neighborhoods, tree-lined blocks and porch lights and the smell of someone's dinner coming through a screen window somewhere. She pulled up at the curb in front of the Craftsman house. A lamp glowed in the front room. The porch light was on. A pair of small rain boots was sitting sideways on the top step. Before he opened the door, he turned to her. "You know why I sat in that chair and waited?" She looked at him. "Because I was brought into this institution by Solomon Greer, and I knew why I was there, and I knew what I'd done. I didn't need the lobby to validate that. I stopped needing buildings to speak for me a long time ago." He paused. "What happened Tuesday was painful, but it also told me something useful." "What did it tell you?" He thought about it for a moment. "That you're capable of learning fast when the cost is high enough." He opened the door. "I think that's actually what Solomon saw in you." He got out and closed the door quietly. Small face appeared at the front window, pajamas already on, hair loose and wild. He went up the path and the door opened before he reached it, and Hazel launched herself at him from the top step. He caught her in one easy motion and carried her inside. The downstairs lamp went out. A moment later, a smaller light came on upstairs. Lenora could see the shape of it through the curtain. The soft glow of a child's room, a small figure sitting up in bed, a larger one beside her. She sat at the curb until the light upstairs went still, then she shifted into drive and pulled away. 6 weeks later, on the second Saturday of May, the Meridian Community Cardiac Screening Initiative launched its first public clinic at Phelps Community Pediatric Practice on the strip between the laundromat and the tax office. Solomon had funded it through the foundation. Lenora had negotiated the institutional partnership herself, line by line, for 3 weeks. Rowan had said it was unnecessary. She had said she was doing it anyway. The morning was warm, and the dogwoods were fully open, white and pink along the block. Beverly had made a banner that said "Welcome" in block letters and hung it in the window. There were folding tables set up on the sidewalk, with water and fruit and brochures in English and Spanish. By 9:15, the waiting area inside was full. Rowan was with a patient. Lenora stood at the front door in a linen blazer greeting families as they came in. Solomon arrived at 9:30 in a good mood and immediately started talking to a grandmother about her blood pressure in a way that made her laugh. A white Subaru pulled up at the curb at 10 minutes to 10. Hazel got out first in overalls and her sneakers and a sketchbook clutched to her chest. She ran straight at Lenora and stopped short in front of her with formal gravity. Hi, Care Dad says you and him built this." Lenora crouched down to her. "Your dad built this. I just kept up the paperwork moving." Hazel considered this. "Beverly told me paperwork is what makes everything else real. Beverly's not wrong." Rowan came out of an exam room and stopped when he saw them. He looked at his daughter and Lenora in the morning light, standing together on the sidewalk in front of the narrow clinic, and something in his face went quiet and settled. Lenora straightened. She held out her hand. He looked at it. He looked at her. He took it. Hazel took his other hand without being asked. Solomon was already inside, telling Beverly a story about a patient from Type 87 that was definitely not HIPAA compliant, and Beverly was laughing hard enough that she'd stopped pretending to file anything. The three of them walked through the front door of the clinic together. Later, there were sandwiches from the deli 2 blocks over on a folding table. Hazel ate steadily and thoroughly and offered Lenora half of a brownie with the seriousness of a diplomat offering a treaty. Rowan walked the length of the clinic slowly, looking at everything the way a man looks at something he built a long time ago and is deciding whether it became what he meant it to. He stopped at the window at the far end where the light came in over the laundromat's AC unit and the strip of parking lot, and just beyond, a single oak tree that had no business being there, growing up through a crack in the asphalt with full spring leaves. Hazel came and stood beside him. She opened her sketchbook. She drew the window. She drew the tree. She drew the clinic sign. Then she drew 3 people standing outside, a tall figure in a flannel, a small figure beside him, a woman with her hand on the small figure's shoulder. She showed it to her father first, then she tilted it so Lenora could see. Lenora looked at the drawing. She looked at the small H penciled in the corner of the page. She did not say anything for a moment. Rowan looked at his daughter, who was already turning to the next page and starting something new with the focused pleasure of someone who has many more things to draw and plenty of morning left. He spoke quietly, just for Lenora. "You're on the right side of the door now." Lenora put her hand down on the windowsill between them, palm down, slowly. Rowan laid his hand over hers. Not fully. Just at the edge, the lightest pressure, as if offering something he would not insist on. She did not move her hand. Hazel drew a bird in the oak tree, then a second one beside it on the same branch, and did not look up. The window held the morning light, warm and ordinary, and entirely enough. And outside the clinic, the neighborhood went about its Saturday, and neither of them had been expecting it. But somewhere between a waiting room chair and a front door held open, both of them had found their way to the same room.